Greetings everyone, my name is Bestenox and welcome to a video in which I speculate on what is possibly in store for the vampire counts in Total War Warhammer 3. In this video we take a look at a couple of fun units and legendary characters and see how their lore and tabletop rules could possibly be implemented into the game. We will also take a look at a few places where I think the faction could be improved to make him even more enjoyable. But before we do that, a few disclaimers. First of all, like I said before, this list is purely speculative and is at most based on educated guesses. Second of all, only units from the original Warhammer Fantasy battle lore will be featured. Anything that made its first appearance in the End Times, Age of Sigmar or the Old World is off the table. And finally, I group most of these units based on how thematically appropriate they are for the featured legendary lord and how well they fit together. But in reality, CA could easily feature any unit from both the first and second DLC, or even make up something completely new for their DLC. The first DLC is centered around ghosts and servants, and the units featured in this one I believe to be the most likely to make an appearance in the upcoming Vampire Counts DLC. This DLC is about the Lamian vampires and the spirits they enslave, and it is led by the progenitor Neferata. Neferata was once a Nehekaran princess with a keen interest in the magical arts. Yet, as she was born a woman, she was forbidden by the Nehekaran law to join the priesthood of the mortuary cult, and was instead forced by her father to become the queen of the city-state of Lamia. Her new position did nothing to curb her fascination with the arcane, and under the malign influence of High Priest Wasoran, she saved some of Nagash's books from destruction, and began to secretly study the art of necromancy. In the pages of Nagash's dark tomes, she found a recipe for the elixir of life, granting immortality and eternal youth. However, as a novice necromancer, she failed to notice that an ingredient was missing from the recipe, and when Neferata and her court drank from the elixir, their immortality came at a great price. Each was cursed with a personalized affliction and an endless thirst for blood, as they became the first of the vampires. For decades, Lamia would be a secret haven for its vampire overlords, until Neferata herself accidentally revealed their true nature. The other Nehekaran states united against Lamia, planning to overwhelm the city by surprise. The coalition was betrayed by a soldier named Fashinesh, who warned the Lamians of the incoming danger, and was given the last of the elixir of life as a reward. Neferata and her dark court would escape the Nehekaran slaughter, spreading out across the world and siring their own bloodlines. Yet the great city of Lamia was forever lost. Fashinesh, after staying with Neferata for a while, would rename himself Vlad von Karstein and conquer Sofia. Neferata and her children would flee into the World Edge Mountains, taking the dwarf world of Karasparint for themselves. From deep within her stronghold, now called the Silver Pinnacle, Neferata secretly influences the courts of the mortals. Her daughters have infiltrated every court, hidden in plain sight as consorts and nobles, from where they manipulate the machinations of state for their own ends. As a legendary lord, Neferata will come as the leader of the Lamian Sisterhood, ruling from her capital in the earlier mentioned Silver Pinnacle in both the narrative Realm of Chaos and the Sandbox Immortal Empires campaigns. With the Lamian vampires being self-focused on espionage, I expect Neferata to have some twisted form of the High Elf intricate court mechanic. I also expect the Lamians to have some way of getting their hands on heroes from other races, as a reference to the Swains from 6th edition. Neferata as a lord will likely be a Lore of Vampires caster. In the single player campaign, she will likely start with a unique follower called Bested, her Shadow Cat familiar. As a reference to her unique 5th edition spell, Shadow Blood, I expect her to have the potion attack attribute and a weapon made out of blood on her model. The rest of the model will depend on what version of Neferata they're going with. She could look like her old 5th edition miniature, her Mortark of Blood appearance from the End Times, which the Lamian Sisterhood faction icon currently does reference. She could look like a vampire Cleopatra, or as Saphira, Mistress of the Dark. Once a simple yet sadistic nobleman at the court of the mythic Vlad von Karstein, Conrad was one of the last people Vlad personally embraced. Yet once the deed was done, the true depths of his insanity were laid bare. Conrad flaunted his vampiric nature in whatever way may please him, drawing much unwanted attention upon the von Karstein household in the process. After Vlad's death, Conrad was fifth in line for the throne of Sylvania, and his ascension seemed unlikely. But the Architect of Fates is known for nothing if not his dark sense of humor. The first vampire lord in line for Vlad's throne died after a failed siege against Middenheim, the second by Conrad's own hands during a show of strength. The third was staked through the heart by a vengeful witch hunter, and the fourth, Manfred von Karstein, recognized the pattern when he saw one, and left Sylvania, leaving the throne to Conrad. It didn't take long for Conrad's bloodlust to lead him to declare war against the Empire, which was divided by civil war at the time. Conrad was a pitiful spellcaster, unable to summon himself an army up to the task of taking over the lands of the Empire. To bolster his forces, he captured every magi he could find, and forced them to serve under him as his necromancers on the threat of incredible violence. Initially, Conrad was able to overwhelm the imperial forces through the tireless onslaught of his undead hordes. However, his sheer ruthlessness kicked against so many shins that not only did the divided empire temporarily reunite against him, but even the dwarves came out of their isolated mountain homes to put an end to his slaughter. Conrad flew into a fit of blinding rage, facing the united forces of men and dwarf head-on at the Battle of Grim Moor. But, during the heat of the battle, Conrad's necromancers decided they had enough of Conrad's cruelty. He let go of the magics that bound the army, and Conrad's cracked mind finally shattered together with his forces. While his army slowly collapsed, Conrad walked away into the nearby forest, laughing maniacally as he disappeared from the battlefield, never to be seen again. As a legendary hero, Conrad von Karstein is a highly aggressive infantry bender. He, of course, comes with all the traits you expect of a vampire lord: undead, the hunger, etc. But what made him unique is that he had a chance each turn to either get the tabletop equivalent of Frenzy or Rampage. In game, I think it's best to give him both at the same time, since Feral Rage already activates at certain health intervals, and Frenzy can be lost when losing a fight. Besides that, he got his Swords of Waldenhof and Isabella's Red Fury ability, which both help him be better at killing things. Now let us move on to which characters would fill the generic Lord and Hero slot for this DLC. Originally hailing from Kemler's Cairn army from White Dwarf 311, the Boar King and Shared Druids are two options that would add some fun variety to the making of your supporting armies. Doubly so with the changes to the generic Vampire Lords that I will bring up later in this video. The Boar Kings are ancient tribal lords who once ruled the old world in the days before Sigmar. Buried together with their intense wealth and loyal entourage, the borough complexes of these chieftains are commonly raided by upstart necromancers, seeking an easy source of well-armed servants and finances. Borough Kings are a lord variant of the White King, bearing great weapons which give them improved armor piercing. They can come on foot, mounted on a skeletal steed, or riding an ancient chariot. On tabletop, they also had an option for a flying chariot, called the Sky Chariot. But considering not even Ark in the Black got to truly fly on his chariot, I don't expect these to make the cut, besides perhaps the Strider trait for their chariot mounts. As the Skeleton Lord, the Borough King will likely come with buffs for Skeleton Warriors, Graveguard, and Black Knights. Shadow Druids are the lingering spirits of those who once counseled the Borough Kings in life. Back then, when his chieftain died, most of his servants were buried together with him, but the Druids would continue to get the tribe forward, while serving under its next leader. Only when their own natural life came at an end would the Druids perform a magical ritual, which would force their own spirits to be ripped from their bodies, so they might continue to guard the sacred borough complexes for all of eternity. As a hero, Shadow Druids are ethereal spellcasters, who will likely have a mixed spell list of the lore of shadows and the lore of death, to make them more distinct from the current vampire heroes. They are less tanky than necromancers, but make up for this with their ethereal attribute, which will hopefully protect them from being sniped by a random menace below spawning clan rats on top of them. Spirit hosts are a swarm of vengeful specters which haunt the battlefield, forming a slow creeping mist of wailing dead. Spirit hosts are a type of hardy swarm unit who, similar to zombies, are made to hold their enemies in place. However, where zombies are used to hold infantry, the spirit hosts were used on tabletop to hold single entity monsters, which would still be an interesting usage for them in Total War Warhammer 3. But even if they don't get the mass to hold monsters, their ethereal attribute still allows them to be a pain to deal with for most infantry units without magic attacks. Halberds were an option for Graveguard in 6th edition, which strangely never got brought back in future editions. In Total War Warhammer 3, they would help give the Vampire Count some anti-large infantry, which they, as a melee-only race, currently lack, much to my surprise. A warrior's life is one often cut short, leaving behind countless oaths and vows unfulfilled. Sometimes the souls of these warriors return to their bodies to haunt the world of the living as a vengeful wight. Other times they fuse with that which they held most dear in the moments before their death, their swords. Driven by the madness of the grave, these unholy blades fly around and butcher anyone they come across, as if being wielded by a bloodthirsty blade master. Their slaughter can only be stopped by the shattering of the blades, setting the soul free at last. Hailing from fantasy roleplay, the Unholy Blades are an interesting addition to the Vampire Count roster. Despite them looking like a bunch of flaming swords, these guys were actually pretty tough, having high weapon strength, good armor, and great melee defense. They also counted as White Blades, which was a White King ability on tabletop that gave them magic attack and killing blow. The latter I can perhaps see become an ability for the Regiment of Renown version, similarly to what happened to the Troglodon and its Primal Roar ability from tabletop. Animation-wise, there are two ways CA could handle the Unholy Blades. The first one is in the same way Guild Wars 2 handles animated weapons, by giving them to a regular sword fighter and turning the character model invisible. The second way would be by giving the swords their own unique set of animations, allowing them to fly and slice across the battlefield. I personally think both ways can work well, as long as the end result looks good. In the early days of vampirism, Neferata took great joy in corrupting righteous souls, and none were as pure and noble as the soul of her bodyguard Abarash. She tricked the protector of Lamia into accepting the first blood kiss, making him drink from those who he had sworn to protect. Feeling betrayed, Abarash abandoned the other vampires when Lamia fell. He traveled the world, honing his skills and training worthy vampires in the martial arts. Such the Blood Knights were born, the greatest of which were known as Castellans. On tabletop, the Castellans were the Blood Knight unit champion, having a higher melee attack than the average knight. I think that turning these into their own unit will be an interesting option for the next DLC, and this would not even be the first time that a unit champion would be turned into an independent unit in Total War Warhammer. I expect the Blood Knight Castellans to become an anti-infantry variant of the anti-large Blood Knights, based on both the current lack of a hand weapon variant in-game, and on the commander models for the tabletop Blood Knights. The last unit for this DLC is the big showstopper, the Coffin Throne. A Coffin Throne is an awe-inspiring palanquin, held aloft by a wild hunt of spirits. Made from twisted gilded bones and draped in Cathayan silks, it is a thing of beauty to behold, for nothing less would please the trio of Lamian vampires riding upon this throne. These vampire ladies like to preoccupy themselves during the humdrum of battle with scrying into a large cauldron of virgin blood, foreseeing all kinds of maledictions for their foes. Built from the same model as the Mortis engine, the Coffin Throne was a powerful war machine on tabletop that was designed for direct battle. Its first tabletop ability, Battle Wills, would translate to an aura to debuff units around the Coffin Throne whose leadership is lower than it. When their leadership is only a bit lower, this ability would lower their weapon strength and missile strength. But a unit whose leadership gets really low would begin to fight among themselves, which would cause them to deal damage to themselves. Its second ability, Scrying Pool, is a bounce spell, which would increase the Coffin's Throne melee attack even further for a short while. Now we go on to the free content that could come with this DLC. First of all, I could see the wartime hero, Countess Marianne Chevaux, come in as a legendary hero. After that I could see a large update to, at the very least, the Blood Kiss mechanic. But more on that later. Let's first focus on that FLC hero. As a mortal, Marianne Chevaux was known as an infamous cat burglar and assassin, until one day when she went on an expedition into the Arabian desert to look for the fabled gemstone known as the Noctu in the ancient crypt of Serutat. When Mariana found the crypt, she dared to touch the Noctu with her greedy fingers, awakening the Lamian vampire Serutat from her slumber. It is unclear whatever Serutat then decided to curse Mariana out of anger or boredom with the blood kiss. But Mariana despises vampire kind for it all the same. She was forced to feed herself on the endless onslaught of suitors, lining up to get better taste of her deadly beauty, blooming beyond its natural duration because of her condition. Despite the boons, Mariana still cursed her existence, and has dedicated herself to hunting the undead, selling her intimate knowledge of vampirism to anyone who can either shield her from the zealous Sigmarite hounds of the Empire, or provide her with knowledge on Seraph's whereabouts. Mariana Chevaux is a legendary vampire hero whose main focus is dueling other undead characters. In wartime, she uses a rapier and crossbow, which are covered in garlic essence, which could be represented as an armor debuff for undead characters in-game. Her magic item is the Noctu, a gemstone which allows her to cloak herself in shadows, giving her increased missile resistance. There are two ways CA could go when it comes to her appearance in-game. She could look like a wartime model, which I believe was unique to her, though I'm not entirely sure. In my opinion, this model looks a bit too much like Isabella and the generic vampire heroes we currently have in-game, and doesn't really help her stand out. Because of that, I can see them use her description from an introductory short story instead. In that story, she wears black leather breeches, a tight-fitting jerkin, and is armed to the teeth with knives. This model would help her stand out more from the other vampire heroes, and make her visually fit her role as a vampire hunter much better. Now up to this point, you might have assumed that Mariana was a vampirecounts character. And rightly so. But this is where she becomes interesting. For you see, Mariana hates vampires and would rather be called actually dead than working with the undead. Instead, she works together with the various war bands in wartime, as long as they aren't blinded by the Sigmarite fame and aren't disgusting, filthy elves. Don't know why she would hate an elf, maybe because it starts with elf. And the last time she did that, it went very wrong. I think it would be extremely interesting to represent this in-game by letting her be recruited by the races officially represented in the wartime rulebooks, and possibly by those in the Town Crier magazines as well. For the published factions we have the Beastmen, the Empire, except for the Cult of Sigmar, Dwarves, Greenskins, Kislev, Nurgle, Skaven, and the Warriors of Chaos. With the addition of Town Crier magazine, we would also have Bretonia, the Lizardman, and Norska. I personally think Countess Mariana Chevaux is a really cool character to have as a legendary hero, both because she has a unique relationship with other factions, and because she's basically Marvel's bait mixed with Julie d'Aubigny, the legendary bisexual French fencer and opera singer from the 17th century who once set a cloister on fire in a dashing escape to save her lover from the life of a nun. Now let us move on to a possible rework for the blood kiss mechanic. Blood kisses are, as you should have realized by now, an important part of the vampire lore, and in-game one of their most unique mechanics. The blood kiss allows the vampirecounts to purchase 3 vampire lords from each of the 5 major vampire bloodlines, for a total of 15 special lords, giving you a powerful general to lead your armies. This should create a gameplay loop where your primary armies are led by powerful vampires, while your supporting armies are led by weaker necromancers and other minions. However, because they kept the generic vampire lords in the recruitment pool, there currently is no reason to not recruit anything but a vampire lord for your armies, unless you are playing as Helm and Gorst. I believe that both the vampire counts and the blood kiss mechanic would be made significantly more interesting if on one hand you can recruit an unlimited amount of bloodline vampire lords from the blood kiss mechanic, as long as you have enough blood kisses. On the other hand, we remove the generic vampire lords from the recruitment pool. This would create a space for the Master Necromancer and the newly added Borrow King to exist within the roster, while making having a vampire lord feel like something truly special. Of course, certain factions, such as Fania and the Lamian Sisterhood, wouldn't need blood kisses to recruit their bloodline lords and can instead obtain them directly through the Lord Recruitment panel. This would represent a direct connection to these respective bloodlines. This would also give Hammer and Gorst direct recruitment of Strogoi vampires, to give something back to the owners of the Grim and the Grave for technically stealing away their DLC's new lord option. As for what to do with a generic vampire lord, get him out of here, get him out! With an update to the blood kiss mechanic, CA would hopefully also take a second look at some of the models of the bloodline lords. Right now there are 2 bloodlines whose models are, in my opinion, a bit disappointing. For this DLC, let's focus on the most appropriate one, the Lamian Lord. Currently, the Lamian Lord uses the same model as the generic vampire hero. And in case you want to know which one of these 3 she is the second small one, which is nearly identical to her neighbor, but in blue. However, on tabletop the Lamian vampires had a unique model which gave them a more human appearance compared to the rest of their kin. I think this model is a great fit for them as the vampires most well known to infiltrate human courts, and it would really help them stand out. Lamian vampires traditionally came mounted on nightmares and coffin thrones, but I feel like Hell's Teeth should also be appropriate for them. Then it is time for the second DLC, Fleshcraft. This DLC will focus mostly on necromantic constructs, with one unit that was slightly too unlikely for the previous DLC also being included. The legendary lord for this DLC is Zacharias the Ever-Living, the most powerful of the Necrarchs. As a young lad, Zacharias was a student under Dieter Hellschnicht in the Forest of Shadows, who was one of the most powerful living necromancers in the old world. While studying under him, Zacharias noticed that the Forest of Shadows bore the scars of powerful necromancy. Following the strange flow of magic seeping from these scars, he came across an ancient hidden tower that was guarded by a legion of undead. Zacharias studied the tower in his patrols for weeks, coming to the conclusion that whatever they were guarding had to be something very powerful, and that he wanted to get his hands on it. Using what he had learned from Hellschnicht, Zacharias casted a spell that blinded the undead guardians of the tower. He made a dash for the crypt at its base, but was captured by the tower's living servants when he spotted him waltzing in. Then he was brought before the lord of the tower, Melchior the Ancient, who saw great potential in Zacharias and granted him the blood kiss. When Zacharias returned to consciousness, he gazed upon his new form in the mirror and despaired, for the curse of the Necrarch bloodline had twisted his flesh into a hideous abomination. He swore vengeance upon Melchior for cursing him, but knew he had to bide his time until an opportunity to overpower the ancient Necrarch presented itself. As in a grim fairy tale, Melchior kept Zacharias as a pupil, but every day Melchior told him that he was starting to bore of him and would kill Zacharias before the next dawn unless his pupil could impress him with a leap in his studies. Zacharias stayed with Melchior for decades, and the old Necrarch taught him everything he knew. But Zacharias hungered for more knowledge. He decided that he would steal Melchior's Book of Nagash, while Melchior went into a rampage, feeding upon his living servants. But, to Zacharias' surprise, Melchior wasn't unaware during his rampage, as he had expected him to be, and the two had a duel in which Zacharias was hurt. Wounded, Zacharias fled, and Melchior sent his human servants after him to bring him back for execution. Exhausted, Zacharias found his way into a cave in the middle mountains, where he fell into a deep slumber. When he awoke, he found that an emperor dragon had come to roost in his cave. Zacharias was so hungry that he engorged himself upon the dragon's blood, and through doing so became one of the strongest vampires in history. He then raised the drained dragon from the dead with his newfound powers, and riding upon it, he shattered Melchior's tower. Melchior fled, and Zacharias claimed lordship over the tower in the Forest of Shadows. On the campaign, I can see Zacharias the Ever-Living starting in the Brass Keep in the Realm of Chaos, since Vestus starts on Albion and is closer to Zacharias' canonical base. In the Mortal Empires, he can show up anywhere. But as a Necrarch, I can see him either going to Lustria or Cortei to hunt down some exotic creatures for his necromantic experiments. Factions hunting the Books of Nagash, like the Tomb Kings and Manfred, will likely get an update that turns Zacharias into one of their permanent objectives, as he is one of the canonical holders of these books. For his personal faction mechanics, I can see him have his own version of the Clan Mulder Flash Laboratory, called the Tower of Shadows, where he can buff units with an attribute new to the Vampire Count roster, Constructs. Stalking the ruins of Mordheim, a murderous shadow preys upon the heads of foolish mercenaries looking for easy gold. Tall, dark and headless, no one is quite sure who the Headless One is, and whether he was a man reborn through necromancy, or created by the dark influences of the twin-tailed comet. I believe that the Headless One is a great fit for the legendary hero slot for this DLC, as he fit the Vampire Count's general spooky October aesthetic, and could also have some fun mechanics to boot. He will also be a blast to see animated, as he continuously chops off the head of anyone he fights with his two giant swords. Wait, did I say giant swords? I mean enormous swords. Yes, the Headless One fights as if he recently had played Elden Ring and was running a max strength build. swear to God, when I wrote this line and recorded this footage, there was no headless option. But God help me if this DLC includes one. Mounts are rare in wartime, so it's understandable that the headless one didn't have one while walking through the ruined city. But I do believe the headless one will get himself a mount when he makes the jump to Total War Warhammer 3. Clearly, the headless one is based on a headless horseman from Sleepy Hollow and the Dullahan from Irish folklore. These horse riders carry their own heads with them and use whips made out of human spines to attack the victim. And it's because of this that I can see the headless one get a nightmare as a mount in game. The headless one has a few possible fun abilities. The first and simplest to implement is his regeneration ability, which allows him to fully recover all his wounds. I can see this ability be represented by the rebirth ability, or something very similarly working. That one was simple, but the other ones are all based on mechanics from the headless one scenario from the Mortime tabletop game. Let's take a look at those. In this scenario, you would place down skull counters on the play area, and whenever you picked one up, it would roll 2d6 and have a random effect. The first type of skull you could find are explosive skulls, which I can see as an explosive projectile for the headless one. The second type are laughing skulls, which cause people to panic and will likely work as a ranged leadership debuff. The third one is the ordinary skull, which doesn't do anything. The fourth type is the animated skull, which I can see as a magic missile. The final one is the headless one's true skull, which I expect to be used for the headless one's recruitment quest battle together with the ordinary ones. When it comes to lords, the vampire counts don't really have much left at this point. But for the hero options we still have a few, and the one that I believe would fill an interesting role are the dregs. Most people in the dark world of Warhammer look unkindly toward the malformed offspring. While not outright killed like true mutants, these deformed children still face abuse from those that are supposed to care for them, and are despised by their peers. The isolation felt by these poor unfortunate people, called dregs by their fellows, means that they easily fall under the malignant influence of a vampire. A few hollow promises of protection and a position of importance are often enough for the dregs to swear their loyalty to the new Dark Masters. Every good fleshcrafter needs an Igor to go out and collect the limbs of the recently deceased for his next creation, and doubly so for the Necrarchs. This is where I feel the dregs fit in on the battlefield, as a support hero who grants powerful buffs to units with the Construct attribute, similar to the Tomb King Necrotech and the Skaven Packmaster. But in general, every self-respecting Dracula needs himself a personal Renfield to move the coffins during the day, spy on mortals, and to kidnap victims in exchange for yummy bucks. This is why I can also see the Dregs be a great campaign map hero, with abilities such as Assassinate, Steal Technology, and Scavenge. All of us are familiar with carrion birds, which once flew among the lands of Nerakara. But in the World Edge Mountains, another, lesser-known population of carrion birds once flew amongst its peaks. When the Pillar Gates collapsed and the hordes of chaos stormed the Warhammer world for the first time, swirling tempests of chaotic energies arrived with them. These storms of Dar washed over the World Edge Mountains, decimating the carrion birds and infusing their corpses with dark magic. The carrion birds reawoke as undead monstrosities, haunting the mountain tops, with a ghastly amalgamation of its victims riding upon its back. The first unit I present to you for the second DLC are the Undead Carrion Riders. But you might be asking yourself, why Undead Carrion Riders? Well, I mean, look at it. That art looks straight from a heavy metal album cover. Further on, it will give the vampire count some fast flying cavalry to add to their set of tools. On tabletop, these Undead Carrion have the Fear and Flying special rule. But they also have their Ghostly Riders, which would add an extra attack for each hit the Carrion made, possibly doubling its attacks. I can see this become a special ability that increases the Carrion Rider's melee and weapon strength with the amount of kills it got or the time spent in melee. While this isn't a construct, I still would enjoy seeing it in game, as I feel the current vampire count roster has a severe lack of creepy crows and ravens, and this unit could definitely remedy that forevermore. Simulacra are stone constructs sculpted to resemble the countless gods of death and psychopoms of civilization's past. They guard ancient burial sites, bound by magic to keep watch over the dead resting within, and to protect them from anyone who would disturb their slumber. Sadly, the magic that binds them is somewhat primitive, and a skilled necromancer can easily take over control of the simulacra and put it to his own use. While more of a traditional construct, rather than the necromantic fleshcraft monstrosities later in this video, the simulacra would still fit the vampire count roster as an alternative to the crypt horror, lacking the regeneration of the former, but being a lot tougher. Patchwork men are flesh colonies, stitched together from the highest quality flesh picked from 100 corpses. They are raised in a similar fashion to that of zombies, but unlike those, the patchwork men retain a portion of their faculties, thanks to their well-preserved brains. The patchwork men are your own personal army of Frankensteins and would serve as a frontline construct. They allow every vampire count faction to obtain a sliver of the glory of Hermann Gore's super chat zombies. Based on the lore, the patchwork men could have a few abilities depending on what CA would find most interesting. They could either just be a good frontline infantry, get a rage ability to represent them going berserk, or encourage to represent them being able to control undead in the creator's name. With a swift needle and some sturdy thread, the fleshcrafter creates his magnum opus, a nightmarish hybrid commonly known as the Abyssal Terror. Each Abyssal Terror is unique, thanks to the different monsters used in their creation. The most common type is the Flayed Lion, combined with the head of a Lustrian Stegodon and the stinger of a giant scorpion from the eastern steppes. However, Abyssal Terrors that combine the bodies of a giant wolf with the wings of an eagle and fuse serrated weapons into their claws are not unheard of. Abyssal Terrors, or Winged Nightmares as they are sometimes called, are a medium-sized monster resembling a fleshy gargoyle. They are a mid-tier flying mount option for the Master Necromancer and Vampire heroes in most vampire armies. But, additionally, in the 6th edition Necrarch army, it lists White Kings and Necromancers as also being able to mount on an Abyssal Terror. As a callback, I think it would be fun for Zacharias' faction to give these characters exclusive access to this additional mount option. As a standalone unit, the Abyssal Terrors are tier 3 single entity monster. Not too strong, but great for assaulting walls early game. On tabletop they were very much the vampire count version of a Manticore, although with reduced weapon strength and a boost to their charge bonus. Wicker Men are large, ever-burning constructs, crafted by a necromancer from wood, cloth and metal. It appears as a mockery of the human form, with its monstrous head and the cage in its chest filled with 1,000 screaming sacrificial bodies. The claws at the end of each of their hands are made from scythes, sickles, plows, and any other sharp farming implement that was laying around. Around the neck of the Wicker Man hangs the necromantic talisman, something that is dead yet incomplete. A hand missing its index finger, a baby missing its head, or a cat missing its tail. Though separated, dark magic still connects the two parts to each other. A necromancer can exploit this by turning the missing piece into a small marionette. The two parts, now separate yet connected, create a link between the Wicker Man and the marionette, allowing the necromancer to control the Wicker Man's every movement as if it was a child's doll. For our big centerpiece monster, we have the Wicker Man. In real life, Wicker Men were large wicker statues, filled with human sacrifices, and made to be burned during religious festivals by the ancient Celtic druids. They have become a part of pop culture through the 1973 folk horror film Wicker Man, and his 2006 remake with Nicolas Cage. In-game, the Wicker Man would be a large single-entity monster and construct, somewhat reminiscent of the Necrofax Colossus, with its body filled with grasping undead. But unlike the Necrofax, the Wicker Man is constantly on fire, and with a melee profile. The main way to hurt a Wicker Man is by attacking the talisman hanging around his neck, with the rest of its body being resistant to damage. This could be represented in-game through a ward save. The Wicker Man would give the vampire counts a surprisingly fast tanky unit with a flaming attack to use against opponents with regeneration, such as trolls and hydras. I personally have a soft spot for the Wicker Man, ever since my first Call of Cthulhu character died inside of one. It also just seems like a really cool unit to see fighting on the battlefield, as this giant burning beacon of necromantic might that demands your attention. Lastly, before we head into the FLC content for this one, I got an alternative unit to possibly replace one of the previous mentioned units. I feel that this unit would work slightly better than the simulacra within the idea of construct crafted by necromancers. However, it is technically not a vampire counts unit, but a dogs of war one, even if lore-wise necromancers could create it. The Fen Beast. Reeking of stagnant water and decaying matter, the Fen Beast is a hulking monstrosity created from the cadavers and souls of the many creatures who lost their lives drowning in the wetlands. These corpses are held together with peat, mud and rotting vines gathered from the marsh. The tormented soul is shoved inside the Fen Beast, lust for vengeance, and will violently attack anyone nearby when not properly controlled by the will of a powerful necromancer. Fen Beasts are a monstrous infantry unit with regeneration, which makes them, similar to the simulacra, an alternative to the Crit Warriors. They differ from the Crit Warriors in that they have the aquatic attribute, and as a construct are able to receive some extra buffs from the dregs. As someone who grew up near Fens and loves peated whiskey, I personally always enjoy some Fen representation in game, and would love to see them. It's also one of those units that can be fanned out to other factions, such as the Empire and possibly to their original army, the Dogs of War, in the future. For the FLC for this second DLC, I believe it will be a good opportunity to add Dieter Helschnicht as an FLC Lord. He's an iconic character, featuring heavily in the 4th edition Vampirecounts army book, back when they were still called the Undead. This would also be a good opportunity to update the second Bloodline Lord that's in need of an updated model, the Necrarchs. Dieter Helschnicht, the Doom Lord of Middenheim and future Mortarch of Nagash, used to be a simple wizard and student of necromancy, who took refuge in the city of Middenheim during the time of the Three Emperors. However, his studies eventually led him to Nagashi Sar, where his destiny was forever changed when he beheld something so maddening it broke his mind and permanently turned his hair grey. Upon his return to Middenheim, he began to plot a takeover of the city he now called home. On Dieter Helschnicht's first attempt, he was pushed out of Middenheim by the Knights of the White Wolf and the All-Ulrich Bartol before he was able to summon his army of undead. His second attempt was stopped by a coalition of Nordland, Middenland and Kislev. It is only thanks to the aid of his mentor, which Dieter Helschnicht has bound to his will, that he escaped that time. After that, many more attempts were made, all failing to conquer Middenheim. Yet the Doomlord plots from the Forest of Shadow evermore, teaching prospecting necromancers while awaiting the next chance for his legion to strike again. Dieter Helschnicht is a legendary necromancer lord who stands apart from Kemmler and Gorst because of his melee capabilities. He rides on top of a unique manticore mount and fights using one of the 7 Chaos rune swords. He is also able to cast Burning Head from the Lord of Fire as a bound spell, thanks to his Rod of Flaming Death. For his personal faction mechanics, I can see him focus on buffing skeletons, as they form the majority of his forces back in his 4th edition battle scenario. I would like for him to have the ability to train necromancers in a similar fashion that Kislev can do with Ice Witches, to represent how Dieter Helschnicht has trained several prominent necromancers. I also expect him to receive a huge boon for finally conquering Middenheim, either through a powerful exclusive landmark or through one of his faction mechanics. For his start location, I expect him to start on either the lands of the Border Princes or his triggers to spread the vampire counts out a bit more. The reason I chose to include Dieter Helschnicht isn't just for his sake, but because it would serve multiple purposes. Firstly, I expect him to make an appearance either in one of Zacharias' quest battles or in his final narrative battle. Secondly, Helschnicht's addition would add another one of Nagash's Mortarchs to the game. Together with Argun, Neverata, Krell, Manfred, Vlad and Luther Harkon, that would mean that 7 of the 9 Mortarchs will already be in-game, and the work for them has been completed when CA creates either a Nagash or End Times DLC. With the arrival of a Necrarch legendary character should also come the second part of the visual update for the Bloodline Vampire Lords. At the moment, the Necrarchs, Lords of Fleshcraft and cursed with an appearance so monstrous that even they themselves despite their looks, are just bald guys. That simply won't do. They are supposed to be Nosferatus, not Balenciaga models. When I see a Necrarch, I want to react like this.
Damn, man! Don't be sneaking up on a brother with your crackhead skin disease test tube baby looking ass! Damn near shit my pants! I don't sell no soap, so what the hell you want?
Yes, that's how I want to feel about the Necrocs. But after that, I think every bloodline will be looking the way they should. Hopefully at this point, CA has successfully made the vampire counts both flavorful and fun to play, so they won't require a fourth, or is it fifth, rework with this DLC. And with that, I think the vampire count roster will be 100% complete. I wanted to talk about the Red Duke, but I didn't really felt like I had anything to add to him. Although he should definitely be made playable at some point, like Toddy. Sharon, I sadly think won't make an appearance, thanks to him getting a model in Age of Sigmar, and all the weirdness that Game Workshop has about it lately. That's partly why I think Dieter Hauschnicht will be sent to Strigos instead. Walla Harkin I can see be added together with Constant Dragonfell in a Nagash DLC, as two supporting legendary lords, to grant Nagash access to his full roster of Mortarchs. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I put a link to a Steam collection with all the mods featured in this video in the description below, so you can get a sneak peek in-game of what's possibly in store for the Vampire Counts. And have a good one!